I have been given no choice but to return to the hallowed halls of YouTube.com in order to hand some L's to Beelzemon bozos who, believe it or not, are coping way harder than Greymon players ever have, which is something I never thought I would say. I always thought that Greymon players, you guys had the market cornered on coping, but no, Beelzemon players, y'all are out of pocket. And this video is not to confirm or deny the tier 0 allegations being thrown at Beelzemon. You know, the deck is what it is, whether you think it's tier 0 or tier 1. We can argue semantics of that all day. I'm not here for that. Instead, I'm here to crack open this delicious Stone Buenavesa, a Mexican-style lager brewed with lime and salt that has been derived from the tears of salty Beelzemon stands. And it is very refreshing, I will say. Very delicious. And I don't really know what it is about Beelzemon players right now. They seem to really want to defend their deck choice as if they're not playing probably one of the strongest decks, if not the strongest deck that the game has seen to date.
To have power is not to be strong.
The only thing that we can say has maybe reached this level is BlackWarGreymon pre-Greymon X nerf. So Nationals format BlackWarGreymon is probably about the same power level, and then if you were to factor in the new support that they got in BT12, then I would say Greymon probably would have been a little bit stronger than Beelzemon right now. But Based Bandai gave us the best ban list of all time by only getting rid of Greymon X and not hitting Cool Boy, like many people were crying for. So we're here, and it's very interesting, the parallels between these two decks. So we're going to get a little bit meta here, and we're going to talk about the Digimon TCG villain arc that we've been a part of for the last two formats, BlackWarGrey and Beelzemon X, because I think these two decks have a lot of degenerate things in common that I think Bandai can learn from and hopefully steer away from in future card design. So I think number one, and probably what is the most frustrating part of Digimon TCG in general, and which has been a common theme amongst the most broken and frustrating to play against decks, is the amount of memory manipulation that these decks have at their disposal. And what I mean by that is that the memory gauge system on its face is very fair. Your opponent gets to play with the resources you choose to give them or are forced to give them. So if I want to choke you to 1 every turn, then I have the ability to do so long as my hand allows it. So that way you have minimal resources to play against my board, while I can also slowly develop whatever I do. Because if I'm choking you to 1, the trade-off is usually that I'm only playing like 1 or 2 low-value cards, as opposed to if I were to put someone to 3, 4, 5, 6 memory, I'm probably making a higher value play or playing a higher value card. The problem with Beelzemon and Greymon is that the memory you give them is not the memory that they can play with, and they have a lot of hidden memory that you can't necessarily account for unless you're making a lot of assumptions about what their hand is. More so Beelzemon than Greymon. So what I mean by this, let's say I'm going against a Greymon player and I choke them to 1 memory, and they have a level 4 Greymon in the back, and they have a Cool Boy up front, and that's it. They can raise their Greymon, Digivolve it into Greymon X Antibody BT11 for free, and then they gain a memory from the Cool Boy. So now instead of being at 1 memory, they're at 2 memory. The Greymon X Antibody can then Digivolve into a Metal Greymon that's 2 colors for 2 memory. So instead of 4 memory, which is what Metal Greymons usually cost. So it's an effective gain of 2 memory. So instead of the 1 memory I pass them to, they're effectively playing with 4 memory with a card that should normally cost 4 memory. Right, so they've made 3 plays in the amount of space that should have taken them 3 turns to make, as opposed to them being able to do it within the span of 1 turn and still not even passing turn. It's still their turn. They're at 0 memory at this point, which is pretty unfair, and I think a lot of people were feeling that, especially in Greymon format, because the power of especially the Digivolve Metal Greymon was definitely balanced by that 4 cost. We even saw Greymon players before Greymon BT11 X Antibody was introduced running win rate 50% or 60%, in order to reduce those costs, because that's just how valuable being able to keep your turn while still getting that Metal Greymon effect off was. So now that they had that ability to do so in archetype, it just made it a little bit too ridiculous, a little too fast, and it definitely showed in the national format tournament, where it was by far in a way the most competitive deck. Beelzemon has a similar problem where you don't know how much memory they actually have to play with on their turn. So again, similar scenario, I'm going to pass a Beelzemon player 1 memory. They have Impmon in the back, and they have an Ion Mako, and that's it. So they can raise their Impmon, Digivolve into Witchmon or Wizardmon X. They can tap the Ion Mako, and then they can stack a card from their hand that either gains them a memory, right? So the Deathslinger or another Wizardmon, or they can stack the Impmon EX2, which will allow them to dig for more mills. So then let's just say in this scenario, they mill the Deathslinger, they put the Deathslinger on top. So, right, so their mills activate from their Digivolve. They mill 2, one of them is the Wizardmon. They gain a memory from the Ion Mako itself. So the Digivolution was free, and then you have to account for any more mills they have on top of that, which could gain the memory, delete things, put Rival's Barrage into play, which is just a free resource they can use for later on in their turn, get free Impmons out from their trash if they mill the Beelzemon EX2. There's just a lot more value than their memory gauge says that they can have. And that feels very bad to play against as the person on the other side of the board, because that kind of takes away the mechanic of the memory system, which is I get to choose how much resources you have, right? Once that gets taken away from you, that is where the frustration comes from. And like I said, has been probably one of the most frustrating play patterns to be present in the game. Going all the way back to set 1, blue decks with Hammer Spark, it always felt really bad when you would choke your opponent to 1 and they had double Hammer Spark to do their play anyways, and then you would lose because of that, because you can't necessarily account for that outside of just making an assumption. And if you're at that point, if you're making assumptions about the opponent's hand, you're in the territory of it's not really in your control anymore, and that feels bad. Lord Knight format, Blinding Ray, same deal. Just gain 2 memory. Sure, they had to trash a card from their security, but that doesn't matter if they're just going to win the game on that turn anyways, or gain such a huge board advantage that you're just not going to be able to come back from that anyways. A more modern deck right now, Mirva Rush, cross Mirva Rush with the 4 blindings, 4 gravity crushes. You know, you can set them to 1 to 2 memory. They drop 2 blinding rays, a gravity crush to gain 6 memory. Then they play Mirva with the Ignite Mon. They have a Zenji on the board. All of a sudden, they have 3 more attacks than you were expecting, and they go for game. Like, it's these sorts of memory gain effects that are relatively uncounterable feel very bad, especially right now in the current format, where the cards that we're supposed to be playing to counter these effects, namely Gazimon, Terriermon, Madoki Betamon, Chumon, are all basically just fodder. They get incidentally deleted by multitudes of effects by these decks, right? So Beelzemon has the starter deck Impmon, which just when you mill a card inheritable, delete a level 3 Digimon. So you can just mill your cards, order your effects so you delete their memory blocker first, and then you can start gaining your memory. They can't do anything about it. Crossheart, same deal. They can just play Akari into Derulamon, delete your blocker or your memory blocker. Greymon, all their memory gain effects come from Tamers for the most part, so memory blockers can't even touch that. And also the Greymon X is just a cost reduction, so that's not blockable either. So these decks just have ways to play around the card that we're supposed to be using to help defend ourselves against these memory gain effects. So that makes it very, very difficult and annoying to play against these style of decks. So what is the answer in the future? So I think there's a couple of ways we can go about this. Number one, I think decks that have the ability to cheat the memory system with excessive memory gain should not have easy access to effects that delete low level Digimon. I think there should be a significant trade-off for that. It shouldn't just be an inheritable in the starter deck Impmon. Maybe it should be, you know, they have to commit a Deathslinger from their hand to delete your memory blocker, because at least that takes them down 4 memory, and then maybe you have a chance to come back. Or it needs to be gated to a higher level Digimon, like the Beelzemon EX2, when Digivolving when attacking, can delete a memory blocker, but at that point, they're losing out on the potential memory gains they could have made from going up their stack. So you gain some value off your memory blocker that way. Maybe a more future way that they could do something along these lines is to introduce better memory blockers, maybe like a higher level 4, level 5 Digimon with a effect that can also block memory gain from tamers. That would have to be balanced some way, because you don't necessarily want to stop the set to 3 memory tamers, because I think those are balanced and the game is balanced around 3 memory, which is a point I've made on this channel multiple times. I think there has to be a way to balance that of some sort. Maybe your opponent can't gain memory past 3, something to that effect. I don't know, it would have to be balanced in a certain way, but it's something, right? Like, we have to come up with ways to defend against these style of decks to prevent this sort of degenerate gameplay from happening again. Another mechanic that I think Bandai should take a look at, that both Beelzemon and Greymon have in common, is the ability to trash security for little to no investment. So I'm referring, of course, to the Metal Greymon X BT11, which is when a Digimon becomes unsuspended on your opponent's turn, trash the security. And this would, of course, include your own Digimon rebooting at the start of your opponent's turn. So obviously the combo was you go Metal Greymon X into BlackWarGrey X or Gaiomon, both of which had reboot. And then assuming you have the X antibody in source or the regular Metal Greymon in source, then just at the start of your opponent's turn, your opponent would just be forced to burn the top card of their security, which would put them in lethal for the following turn. And it was often very difficult to deal with, especially in board control situations where your opponent could just like choose not to attack into your security regularly and then just safely burn away your security, so that way there's no chance of a cheesy option card comeback. Very frustrating to play against. Beelzemon, of course, Beelzemon X Antibody can trash 1 card from the opponent's security on Digivolve for every 10 cards in your trash. So the late game play at this point is you chip them 1 or 2 security, you get to 30 cards in trash, go into Beelzemon X, and then it's just the free win from there. There's no comeback from your security because it all gets trashed. And then there's 1 or 2 7-fold clusters in their trash that they can then use to delete your blockers, and it's just a free game from there. In general, trashing security has been an interesting mechanic. I think the first deck that was really doing this was Hercules Kabuterimon back in BT4, BT5 format with the green starter deck. Mega Kabuterimon, which had the inheritable: when you delete an opponent's Digimon by battle, trash the top card of their security. And then you would combine this with the piercing from Hercules Kabuterimon, and then you would trash top card of security and then do a check. I think that's the first really major deck to do security trashing effects. Beyond that, I think we had Mastamon. The old Mastamon BT3 could also trash security, so you would see later in the meta that Lilith Loop players would tech in a Mastamon to do that as their finishing play. So instead of trying to potentially check into a Hammer Spark or what have you as your last security, they would simply go into Mastamon, trash it, and then attack with the Ginkaku promote for game, bringing it back with the Mastamon effect. What else had trashing security that was annoying? I guess Agubond technically, but that one had a much more significant cost, and the trashing security was balanced by the fact that you also had to trash 2 of your own security. I digress. Anyways, trashing security in general feels kind of bad because a lot of times the game is kind of put into a position where your security is your last line of defense. So when you are building your deck, oftentimes you will think to yourself, what options can I play that I can hit in my security to hopefully prevent myself from losing in, scenarios that I would otherwise have no choice but to take the L. Because a lot of times in Digimon, the board state so happens that the only way you cannot lose is that if you hit that 1 card in security. And yeah, it's a luck factor, it's a sack factor, but you build your deck in such a way to have that comeback potential. So to have that stripped away from you by these effects like Metal Greymon X and Beelzemon X can feel bad, because that means they're taking away a conscious deck choice that you made to help save yourself in those exact scenarios. Not to mention the fact that it just creates sort of uncounterable board states where the opponent or the person piloting these powerful decks can play to guarantee a win, and that can feel bad as well, because you as the person sitting across from them feels like you have no recourse. Like, they just play their deck and they win, and there's no two ways about that. And that is, again, incredibly frustrating. That's the key word of this video, frustrating, because that's really what it is like to play against these decks. I think the only other deck that people apply the word frustrating to is probably Security Control, and that should say something about how people feel about Beelzemon, except for, and wouldn't you know it, the Beelzemon stands. Those poor slighted souls who have been waiting since EX2 to finally have their moment. And I don't know what it is about you Beelzemon players right now, but you guys are really trying to convince people that your deck is not that strong. And no one's buying it. In fact, it's making you guys seem worse. Quite frankly, even the Greymon players, like I said at the beginning of this video, Greymon players have been insufferable since BT1. And when they had their time to shine in BT11, at least most of them can admit that their deck was kind of broken. And Greymon X definitely needed to get hit. I think most of them agree with that. And now we're here seeing Beelzemon players saying that no, the deck's not even tier 1. It's just casino, bro. Like, there's, you know, it takes skill to pilot. And honestly, let's talk about the skill issue with Beelzemon, because yes, you need skill to not mill yourself out, and you need skill in the sense that you need to know how to play out certain matchups, but I don't think the deck is as high skill as people want it to be to sort of defend it against the deck's too strong allegations, right? Come on, guys, the deck plays itself. It plays itself. You know it plays itself. Here's a perfect example. I gave a Beelzemon deck to my buddy yesterday at locals. Never read a single card, didn't know what any of them did. The only person he lost to is the guy at our locals who got top 4 nats. Like, he beat everyone else, cleaned their clock, didn't even know what the cards did. Deck plays itself. It does. It has a very low, or sorry, I should say very high skill floor. So which means that at its base level, like literally someone who knows how to play the game but has never read any of the Beelzemon cards is going to be getting a lot more wins than they probably should be, just because the deck will get those wins on its own by virtue of what its cards do. It's too good. And yes, if you're a high skill player, you can take the most out of that deck and then get it to the top levels. And I think that's why we're seeing half of top 16s be Beelzemon, because it is the most competitive deck. It is the strongest deck. It is probably the most skill expressive deck at the moment, but that doesn't mean that it's also only skill. The floor is too high. It's too high. Something needs to be done. We need to lower the floor of the deck. We need to make it weaker in the hands of weaker players. How do we go about that? We see already in Ultimate Cup format for the upcoming Ultimate Cups that they are restricting the EX2 Impmon to 1. The intention being that you will mill a lot slower, slowing down the deck, getting you less effects. Is that going to do anything in the long run? It probably will. You know, maybe you're 1 or 2 turns slower to hit your 20 to 30 cards in trash. Certainly possible. The EX2 search effect is negligible. I think most people actually don't really use it that much unless they have to. So as far as consistency goes in terms of your draws, I don't think it's going to affect it that much, but I think it will affect the deck in terms of mill speed. So we'll see if that sticks, and then maybe if it does, then we'll see that be implemented into the standard format. Having said that, the previous Ultimate Cup bans that people thought would stick into standard format, like Promo Grand Kawaga to 1, Death X to 1, Chaos Degrade to 1, BlackWarGreymon's X to 1, did not cross over to standard format in the most recent ban list. So we will see how that goes. In addition to, you know, Hydramon got limited to 1 in Ultimate Cup, and I definitely don't think we'll be seeing that one in standard format. So who knows? We also know that Bandai has obvious knowledge of where the meta is going in the future by virtue of the fact that they did not hit any of the cards in the Metal Garurumon deck, even though that deck was dominating for so long. And right now in this current format, the deck is essentially non-existent just because Bandai has sort of power crept it out or made counters to the deck in the form of things like Merva, Retail Blocker, just being able to make 3 blockers. You know, Beelzemon has a bunch of security bombs that Garurumon can defend itself against. You know, Greymon can make the big blockers, stuff like that. So who knows, maybe Bandai has something in mind for Beelzemon in the future that isn't necessarily just the ban list. We will see. But I do have to say, Beelzemon players, please cool it. Your deck is too good. It's too good. It's too good. It's too good, guys. It does too much, too many things. Deletion, memory gain, trashing, multiple draws, X antibody stuff. You know, you can pull from trash, toolbox. It does too much. It's doing too much right now. And you guys just have to come to that realization and stop trying to argue tier 0, tier 1. That's just semantics. It doesn't matter. Okay. What matters is that your deck is too good. It's too strong. Y'all need to chill out. You know, have your little moment in the sun. You know, go to locals and do your mills. You know, have your fun. That's fine. You know, Greymon players got to do their thing. You know, Ornite players got to do their thing. You know, whatever. Just enjoy it for what it is, but don't pretend that you are outskilling people, because it's very likely you're not. Your deck's just playing yourself.